Pushpin title. They evicted my family from our dream home. When the wealthy developers forced my family out of the house we built with our own hands, they thought we'd disappear quietly. But they underestimated the power of a broken heart burning for justice. This isn't just about a home, it's about revenge, redemption, and reclaiming everything they stole from us. A powerful USA-based revenge drama of a family wrongfully evicted from their dream home. Betrayed by the system and crushed by greedy developers, one woman rises from despair to fight back with cunning. The dream we built. I still remember the first time my father drove us down the quiet, tree-lined road that led to the plot of land where our future home would stand. The year was 2008, and while the country was staggering under the weight of a financial crisis, my parents carried a dream larger than fear, larger than statistics, larger than anything the evening news warned about. "This is it," Dad had said, pulling the old pickup to a stop in front of the overgrown lot. His hands rested proudly on the steering wheel, calloused from years of factory shifts. His eyes, tired but glowing, were fixed on the land. "This is where our home will rise." Mom leaned forward from the passenger seat, her hand brushing against his. "Not just a home, Daniel," she whispered, her voice soft, yet carrying the firmness that had kept our family afloat through lean times. "Our dream." I was only 16 then, still more concerned with basketball practice and my part-time job at the diner than the weight of mortgages or property lines. But even I felt something stir in my chest that day. The land wasn't much to look at, just a patch of grass with wildflowers peeking through and a few scraggly trees clinging to the edges. Yet somehow, standing there, I saw it, the shape of something permanent, something ours. Building from scratch. It wasn't easy. God, it wasn't even close. Every nail, every board, every late night spent covered in sawdust carried the price of sacrifice. My father worked double shifts at the factory, and Mom picked up extra hours at the library. My brothers and I spent weekends mixing concrete, hammering planks, and hauling shingles until our muscles ached. We didn't hire contractors or flashy builders. We built it with our own hands. My little sister Emma was too young to lift tools, but she sat on the porch beams, swinging her legs, humming songs, and handing us bottles of water when we collapsed in the heat. When the walls finally stood tall and the roof closed over us, Dad gathered us inside the bare living room. The walls were unfinished, beams still exposed, wires hanging loose. But to him, it was already a palace. "We built this," he said, his voice thick with pride. He laid his hand on the wooden frame as though it were a living thing, as though it had a pulse. "This isn't just wood and nails. This is sweat, blood, love, and faith. No one can ever take that away from us." We believed him. A house that became a home. Over the years, that raw skeleton of wood and concrete blossomed into the beating heart of our family. We planted a small apple tree in the backyard that grew crooked but stubborn, just like us. Every fall, Mom would bake pies from its fruit, and the smell would drift through the kitchen, making the whole house feel like a warm embrace. Every Christmas, we strung lights across the porch and sang carols with the neighbors. Every 4th of July, Dad fired up the grill, and we watched fireworks from lawn chairs, our laughter echoing against the summer sky. Even the walls seemed alive with memory. Scratches on the kitchen doorway marked our heights as we grew taller. The attic held boxes of old photos, broken toys, and letters we never threw away. The living room rug bore the faint stain of grape juice Emma had spilled one chaotic Thanksgiving, and Dad refused to replace it because memories shouldn't be scrubbed out. This house wasn't just where we lived. It was who we were. Trouble on the horizon. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs, the late-night arguments between my parents about bills, the envelopes piling on the counter stamped with past due, the hushed phone calls that ended with my father's shoulders slumping heavier each time. But at the time, I chose not to notice. Like any 20-something clinging to comfort, I believed the house was untouchable, a fortress built not just with lumber, but with destiny. The first real tremor came when Mom mentioned a company buying land in our area. Harrison Development, she said, run by a sharp-suited man with a shark smile. He was swallowing up properties, demolishing homes, and putting up luxury condos that didn't belong in our modest neighborhood. Dad waved it off. "We've got the deed. We've got the mortgage. They can't touch us." His words were steady, but I caught the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The night of the storm. One evening, a storm ripped through town. The power went out, and we all huddled in the living room, candles casting golden halos against the walls. Rain pounded the roof, wind rattled the windows, but inside, wrapped in blankets, we were safe. Emma curled against Mom's lap, whispering, "What if the storm takes the house away?" Dad laughed, pulling her close. "This house? Never. It's stronger than any storm." I held on to those words. I clung to them like a promise. If I had known then what was coming, the day strangers would rip that promise away, tearing our dream apart, I would have memorized every shadow on those walls, every crack in the ceiling, every scent of candle wax and rain. Because the truth is, storms don't just come from the sky. Some storms wear suits and ties. Some storms hide behind contracts, lawyers, and crooked smiles. And the storm that was about to hit us would be far worse than anything nature could deliver. Closing reflection. Years later, when people asked why I fought so hard, why revenge became the only language I spoke, I always thought back to that house. To the nights we laughed until our sides hurt, to the mornings filled with coffee and sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, to the promise my father made, that no one could take it away. But they did. And that was their first mistake. The letter on the door. It was a Saturday morning, one of those days that should have been filled with routine comforts, the smell of bacon sizzling in the pan, Emma's laughter echoing from a hallway, Dad tinkering with his truck in the driveway. Instead, it was the morning everything shifted. I had been coming back from a run, earbuds in, sweat cooling on my skin when I saw it. A piece of paper taped to the front door, flapping slightly in the spring breeze. At first, I thought it was just another flyer, pizza coupons, or some church fundraiser. But when I drew closer, the bold black letters at the top froze me in place. Notice of eviction. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words blurred, as if my eyes refused to let them in. I ripped the paper from the door and scanned the lines, each sentence slicing deeper than the last. This property is under foreclosure. All occupants are required to vacate within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in forced removal by county authorities. My knees felt weak, as though the ground itself had tilted. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. We had the deed. Dad always said so. This was our home. The kitchen table. I carried the notice inside like it was a bomb and dropped it on the kitchen table. Mom was washing dishes, humming softly to herself. When she turned and saw my face, the smile faded instantly. "What is it?" she asked, drying her hands. I couldn't find the words, so I just slid the paper toward her. Her eyes flicked across it once, then again, as if reading it twice might change the meaning. By the third time, her hands were trembling so badly she had to grip the edge of the table. "Daniel," she called, her voice cracking. Dad came in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. "What's all the shouting about?" Mom didn't answer. She just handed him the notice. I watched his face harden as he read. His jaw clenched, and a flush crept up his neck. But when he looked up at us, there was something else in his eyes. Fear. This has to be a mistake, he muttered. I'll go down to the bank Monday morning. We're not behind on payments. I know we're not. But his voice carried a hesitation that made my stomach sink. Cracks in the foundation. The weekend felt endless. We tried to carry on as normal. Emma still had her soccer game. Mom still baked her Sunday bread. But the notice sat on the counter like a curse, poisoning the air. On Monday, Dad took off work and drove to the bank. When he came home that evening, his shoulders were slumped, his face pale. What happened? I asked before he could even step inside. He shook his head. They said the loan was sold. Some technicality in the paperwork. Harrison Development bought the rights. The name felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Harrison. The same company Mom had mentioned, the one that had been devouring homes all across town. Mom's voice broke into a whisper. But we've made every payment. Every single one. Dad slammed his fist against the doorframe. They don't care. They've got lawyers, contracts, loopholes I've never even heard of. They said it's final. Emma came down the hall just then, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide. Daddy, are we gonna lose our house? The silence that followed was more terrifying than any answer. Neighbors watching. Within days, the whispers started. The neighbors noticed the notice on our door. Some avoided us, afraid our bad luck might be contagious. Others looked on with pity, which was somehow worse. Mrs. Green from across the street brought over a casserole, her eyes wet with sympathy. I'm so sorry, dear, she told Mom. We heard about Harrison. They did the same thing to my cousin over in Oak Ridge. But pity didn't fill the hole growing in our chests. I overheard Dad arguing with the bank again and again. Each time, he sounded more desperate, more broken. One evening, I found him sitting in the truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. They can't take it, he whispered, though no one was listening but me. I built this house. With my hands. They can't just take it. The 30 days. The notice gave us 30 days. 30 days to pack up a lifetime. 30 days to say goodbye to every memory carved into the walls. Each day was a countdown, a ticking bomb. Mom tried to keep things normal, still cooking dinner, still helping Emma with homework, but the light in her eyes dimmed. My brothers fought more, their tempers short, their futures suddenly uncertain. I started dreaming about the house itself, as if it were alive, begging us not to leave. In my dreams, the walls whispered, "Don't go. Don't let them win." The developer arrives. On the 15th day, Harrison himself showed up. A sleek black car pulled into the driveway, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He looked at our house not like it was a home, but like it was a piece of land he'd already stripped bare in his mind. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said smoothly, extending a hand my father refused to take. "I'm sure this is difficult for you, but business is business. We'll be putting luxury townhouses here. Great opportunity for the community." My father's fists clenched at his sides. "This community doesn't need your condos. This is our home." Harrison's smile never wavered. Not anymore. The arrogance in his tone, the way he dismissed us like ants under his shoe, it ignited something in me I couldn't name yet. A rage deeper than anger, sharper than grief. Something that whispered, "This isn't over." The breaking point. That night, the house felt different. Heavy, like it knew what was coming. Dad sat in his chair, staring at the eviction notice crumpled in his hands. Mom silently folded laundry, her face pale and tight. Emma fell asleep on the couch clutching her rabbit, her small body trembling even in dreams. I sat at the window, staring at the lights of the Harrison Development project down the road, already under construction. And in that silence, I made a promise. They could take the house. They could take the walls, the floors, the roof over our heads. But they couldn't take our story. They couldn't take the blood and sweat we poured into this place. And someday, somehow, I would make Harrison regret the day he taped that notice to our door. The day we lost everything. The morning of eviction day was too quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. I woke to the sound of boxes being taped shut, the harsh rip of packing tape slicing through the silence. When I walked into the living room, Mom was kneeling on the carpet, folding photo albums into a cardboard box. Her hands moved slowly, as though each picture weighed 100 pounds. Dad was sitting in his chair, staring at the wall. He wasn't dressed for work. He wasn't dressed for anything. Just a worn flannel shirt and jeans, his eyes hollow, his spirit crushed. Emma shuffled into the room, clutching her stuffed rabbit by the ear. She was only 9, too young to understand contracts or mortgages, but old enough to feel the ache of loss. "Do we really have to go?" she whispered. No one answered her. The silence was answer enough. The knock on the door. It came at 9 a.m. sharp, the sound of knuckles pounding against the wood. Heavy, final, like the toll of a church bell. Dad rose slowly, like a man walking to his own execution, and opened the door. 2 sheriff's deputies stood there, their uniforms pressed, their expressions blank. Behind them loomed a moving truck. Within minutes, strangers were inside our home. They moved with efficiency, hauling out boxes, furniture, even the rug Mom had begged Dad to buy after saving coupons for months. Our belongings spilled onto the lawn, exposed to the eyes of neighbors who had gathered at the edges of their driveways. Some whispered to each other. Some looked away, embarrassed by our shame. A few just watched, curious, as though it were entertainment. I stood frozen, fists clenched, rage boiling inside me. Every photograph, every chair, every piece of our lives being carried out as though it were trash. Emma started crying when they took her bed frame. "That's mine," she screamed, her small fists pounding against the mover's arms. "You can't take it." One of the deputies pulled her gently aside, murmuring something about how it's just stuff. But it wasn't just stuff. It was her world. Our world. Harrison's smirk. And then, as if the humiliation wasn't enough, he arrived. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up, and out stepped Harrison himself. His suit was immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He surveyed the scene with a satisfied smirk, as though watching a well-executed performance. "Mr. Miller," he said smoothly, hands in his pockets. "I trust everything is proceeding as ordered." Dad lunged toward him, but the deputies held him back. "You bastard," Dad spat. "You think you can just walk in here and—" Harrison raised an eyebrow, calm as ever. "I don't think, Mr. Miller."
"I know.
That's the difference between men like you and men like me. I had never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. My hands shook with the urge, but I stood frozen, powerless. Mom pulled Emma close, shielding her from the sight. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to let Harrison see her break. Goodbye, room. At one point, I slipped upstairs to my bedroom. The walls were bare now, the posters taken down, the shelves empty. Only faint outlines remained where furniture had once stood. I walked slowly to the window, looking out at the yard, the crooked apple tree swaying gently in the breeze. For years, that view had been the first thing I saw every morning, the last thing before bed. Now it felt like a view from a prison window. I pressed my palm against the wall. The wood was warm beneath my hand, as if the house itself was alive, saying goodbye. A memory flashed, me as a kid, lying on the floor drawing superheroes, Mom calling me for dinner, Dad's laughter rumbling from the porch. It hit me like a punch to the chest. "This isn't over," I whispered to the empty room. "I'll come back for you. I swear it." The walk away. By late afternoon it was done. Our house stood empty, hollow, stripped of the life we had poured into it. The deputies gave us one last warning. "You can't stay here tonight. Please gather yourselves and leave." So we did. We loaded what little we could into Dad's old truck, boxes of clothes, some dishes, Emma's rabbit. Everything else was left behind, swallowed by Harrison's greed. As we pulled away, I looked back through the rear window. The house seemed to shrink with every foot we drove, until it was just a shape in the distance. But it wasn't just a house we left behind. It was our history, our security, our pride. And something inside me broke that day.
The vow.
That night, in the cramped apartment we managed to rent with the last of our savings, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I could still smell the wood of our old living room. I could still hear Emma's sobs. I could still see Harrison's smirk burned into my mind. And I made a vow. I would not let this be the end of our story. Harrison thought he had won. He thought we were beaten, broken, finished. But he didn't know what losing everything does to a person. He didn't know that sometimes being stripped down to nothing is the spark that ignites a fire no one can control. One day, I promised myself Harrison would regret this. He would pay for every tear, every humiliation, every ounce of suffering he inflicted. And when that day came, I wouldn't just take back what was ours. I would take everything from him. Living in the shadows. The apartment smelled of mildew the moment we stepped inside. The kind of damp, stale air that clung to your clothes and made you feel like you'd never be clean again. It was small, 2 bedrooms, peeling linoleum floors, paint yellowed with age. A single buzzing fluorescent light flickered in the kitchen, casting everything in a sickly glow. "This is temporary," Dad said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just until we get back on our feet." But we all knew the truth. Nothing about this felt temporary. Life after eviction. The first few weeks were the hardest. Mom tried to keep our routines alive, cooking dinner, checking Emma's homework, folding laundry. But in the dim apartment, even her efforts felt hollow, like stage props in a play no one wanted to act in. Dad grew quieter with each passing day. He still went to work at the factory, but when he came home, he didn't tinker with the truck or joke with Emma. He just sat in the old armchair we'd managed to cram into the living room, staring at the wall as if waiting for answers that never came. Emma cried herself to sleep most nights, clutching her rabbit until its seams started to split. She'd whisper about missing her room, her window view of the apple tree, the way the sunlight used to warm her bed in the mornings. And me? I wandered the streets at night, unable to bear the suffocating walls of the apartment. Every time I passed by our old neighborhood, I felt the rage twist tighter inside me. Harrison's development project was already breaking ground, heavy machines tearing up the soil where our apple tree once stood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn it all down. Cracks in the family. Poverty doesn't just take your money. It takes your dignity, your patience, your ability to look each other in the eye without shame. Arguments began to erupt in our little apartment, sharp and sudden. We should have fought harder. Mom snapped one evening, slamming a pot onto the stove. "And done what?" Dad shot back, his face red. "The lawyers laughed us out of the room. You think I didn't try?" Emma covered her ears at the table, tears brimming. I wanted to shield her, but I was too busy battling my own storm. One night, I exploded. "Maybe if you'd planned better, this wouldn't have happened," I shouted at Dad. The words hung there like poison. His face crumpled, not with anger, but with something worse. Hurt. He didn't say a word, just grabbed his coat and left the apartment. I hated myself instantly, but the rage inside me had nowhere else to go.
The job.
Money was tight, tighter than ever. So, I picked up more shifts at the diner. Flipping burgers, scrubbing dishes, wiping tables sticky with spilled soda. The pay was meager, but it kept the lights on. The worst part wasn't the work. It was the customers, people from our old neighborhood, still living comfortably in their homes. Some recognized me, their pity disguised as politeness. "Hang in there, kid," one man said, sliding a tip across the counter. His words felt like acid on my skin. I didn't want their pity. I wanted revenge. A whisper of corruption. One night after my shift, I overheard two men at the counter talking. Both wore suits, their voices low but careless after too many beers. Harrison's got the mayor in his pocket. One of them chuckled. That's how he's getting all those permits pushed through so fast. Yeah, the other said, sipping his drink. And the bank deal?
Total inside job.
Miller family never stood a chance. Harrison bought that mortgage for pennies. The words hit me like lightning. Never stood a chance. So it hadn't just been bad luck. It hadn't just been paperwork. It was rigged. From the beginning, Harrison had stacked the deck against us. I walked home that night with fists clenched, the city lights blurring in my vision. For the first time, the rage inside me began to take shape. Seeds of revenge. In the weeks that followed, I started digging. At the library, I read every article I could find about Harrison development. Each glossy magazine spread praised his vision, his innovation. But buried deep in old archives, I found whispers of lawsuits, disgruntled employees, displaced families, questionable accounting practices. It wasn't enough to topple him. Not yet. But it was a crack in the facade. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down names, dates, connections. Harrison's empire was big, but it wasn't invincible. At night, I lay awake in the apartment, listening to Emma's soft breathing, Mom's restless tossing, Dad's exhausted snores. And I whispered to myself, I'll make him pay. I don't know how yet, but I will. A visit to the old house. One evening, I couldn't resist. I walked back to our old street. The house was still there, but it wasn't ours anymore. The windows were dark, boarded up. Spray paint covered one side, scrawled by vandals who didn't know, or didn't care, about the memories inside those walls. The apple tree was gone, ripped out by the roots. A pile of dirt marked where it once stood. I stood at the curb, my chest aching, and made another promise. Harrison, I whispered, my voice trembling. You took everything from us.
But you don't know me.
You don't know what I'll do. And when I come for you, you won't see it coming. The night swallowed my words, but I knew they weren't lost. They were etched into me, burned into my very bones. Closing reflection. We were shadows now, living in a place that felt more like a prison than a home. But shadows can grow strong in silence. They can learn patience. They can learn how to strike. And as I sat in that dim apartment, staring at the flickering light above the kitchen table, I realized something. Harrison thought eviction had ended our story. But for me, it was only the beginning.
The first strike.
The night I made my first move against Harrison, the city felt different. The air was heavy with summer heat, pressing down on me like a warning. Streetlights buzzed, casting halos on cracked pavement. I walked with my hood pulled low, hands stuffed in my pockets, heart hammering against my ribs. For weeks, I'd been planning. I didn't have lawyers. I didn't have money. But I had anger, and sometimes anger is enough to build a plan. The construction site. Harrison's newest project was only a few miles from where our house once stood. A cluster of half-built luxury condos, guarded at night by chain-link fences and padlocks. By day, the site buzzed with cranes and workers. By night, it sat quiet, floodlights casting eerie shadows across the steel skeletons. That night, I stood at the fence, staring in. The machines rested like sleeping beasts, yellow excavators, bulldozers, cement mixers. Tools of destruction. My fists clenched. These machines had torn families from their homes. They had ripped apart the soil of my childhood. And tonight, they would bleed. The plan. I wasn't reckless. I knew enough to keep myself alive. I'd read articles about construction sabotage, picked up tips in online forums where angry people whispered about fighting back against corporations. The trick wasn't destruction. It was disruption. Hit them where it hurts. The wallet. Delay meant money. And money was the language Harrison spoke best. In my backpack, I carried two simple tools, a crowbar and a bottle of sugar. Crude, but effective. Sugar in the gas tanks of heavy machinery could ruin engines beyond repair. The crowbar was for locks and leverage. Crossing the line. My hands shook as I slipped through a gap in the fence I'd scouted earlier. The metal scraped my jacket, the sound loud in the quiet night. For a moment, I froze, every nerve on fire. But the site was deserted. Just me, the machines, and the hum of the floodlights. I crept to the first bulldozer, my shadow long on the dirt. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it might give me away. With trembling fingers, I twisted the gas cap open and poured the sugar in, the grains cascading like sand in an hourglass. One machine down, then another, and another. By the time I reached the cement mixer, my fear had transformed into something else, exhilaration. This wasn't just sabotage. This was justice. The rush of power. By the time I finished, sweat clung to my back, my hands sticky with sugar dust. I stood in the middle of the site, chest heaving, staring at the silent machines. Tomorrow morning, when the engines roared to life, Harrison's crew would find them crippled. Repairs would cost tens of thousands. Maybe more. For the first time since the eviction, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. I wasn't powerless anymore. Close call. As I slipped back toward the fence, headlights swept across the site. My heart lurched into my throat. A security truck rolled up, tires crunching gravel. 2 guards inside, their voices muffled through the glass. I dropped flat against the dirt, the backpack digging into my spine. Every second stretched into eternity as the truck idled, its beams slicing across the steel frames. One guard stepped out, shining a flashlight. The beam swept dangerously close, brushing the ground only feet from me. I held my breath. If they found me here, it wouldn't just be trespassing, it would be sabotage.
Jail time.
My family couldn't survive that. Finally, after what felt like forever, the guard shrugged and climbed back into the truck. The engine rumbled, the lights moved on, and the night swallowed them. Only when the truck was gone did I dare to move, crawling on my belly until I reached the fence. My hands shook as I pulled myself through. When my feet hit the pavement outside, a laugh bubbled up in my throat. Not from humor, from sheer, reckless relief. I had done it, and they hadn't caught me. The fallout. The next morning, I sat in the diner, pouring coffee for customers, trying to act normal. But inside, I buzzed with anticipation. Around noon, I heard it, the sweet sound of chaos. A group of construction workers piled into the booth near the window, grumbling loudly. "Whole damn fleet shot," one cursed, slamming his fist on the table. "Engines won't start. Mechanics say someone poured sugar in the tanks." "Boss is losing it," another said, shaking. Telling Dad. That night, I told Dad what I'd done. We were alone in the apartment, the others asleep. He sat in his armchair, the TV flickering across his tired face. "I hit Harrison," I said quietly. His eyes snapped to me. "What do you mean?" I explained. Every detail, every risk, every second of adrenaline. I expected him to be angry, maybe even furious. But when I finished, he didn't shout. He didn't scold. He just leaned back, staring at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes in months. Pride. "You're playing with fire," he said finally, his voice low. "But maybe that's what it's gonna take." He didn't bless what I'd done, but he didn't condemn it either. And that was enough. Closing reflection. That night, lying in the dark, I thought about the machines, the sugar, the guards, the workers' angry voices. For so long, I had felt like Harrison was untouchable, a mountain too big to climb. But mountains erode. Even giants stumble. The first strike had landed, and I was just getting started. Allies in unexpected places. The first strike against Harrison should have been enough to satisfy me for a while. But instead, it only sharpened my hunger. I walked through the diner the next day with a spring in my step, pouring coffee and refilling plates like nothing had changed. But inside, I was on fire. For the first time in months, I felt alive. Still, a single person can only do so much. One strike won't bring down a man like Harrison. If I wanted to make him truly bleed, I needed more. And sometimes, more comes from the most unexpected places. The stranger in the corner. That afternoon, a man sat alone in the corner booth. He had a weathered face, the kind you see on men who've worked hard all their lives. His hands were calloused, nails still lined with dirt. He wore a faded construction jacket, but there was something hollow in his eyes. I carried over his coffee, and as I set it down, he looked at me with a kind of recognition. "You're from the Evans house, ain't you?" he asked. I froze. My throat tightened. "Yeah," I said finally. "We were evicted." He nodded slowly, staring into his cup. "Harrison got you too, huh?" Those words, "got you too," hung heavy in the air. Shared wounds. His name was Mark Doyle. He'd been a foreman at one of Harrison's earlier projects, years before. A man with decades of experience in construction, he'd been loyal, hardworking, until Harrison decided he was too expensive. "They pushed me out, replaced me with cheap labor," Mark said, his jaw tight. "Then they blacklisted me. Couldn't get another job in the city after that. Lost my house. Lost my marriage." Harrison's got a way of chewing people up and spitting them out. I sat across from him, my chest heavy. His story sounded too familiar, like an echo of my own. "You're not the only one," he added, leaning closer. "There's a whole trail of folks Harrison's destroyed. You just don't hear about them because he makes sure their voices get buried." A chill ran through me. For so long, I'd thought it was just us, just my family who had been unlucky enough to cross Harrison. But Mark's words cracked open a door I hadn't considered. We weren't alone. A spark of connection. I hesitated, then lowered my voice. What if we stopped letting him bury us?" Mark looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying he isn't untouchable. He thinks he is, but he's not." My voice shook, but I kept going. "I made him bleed already. He doesn't know it was me, but I hit him." Mark studied me for a long moment, the kind of silence that makes your palms sweat. Then, to my surprise, the corners of his mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. "Kid," he said, shaking his head, "you've got guts." The network. That night, Mark introduced me to others. We met in the back room of an old boxing gym that had gone out of business years ago. Dust hung in the air, the walls lined with peeling posters of fighters long forgotten. Around the circles sat 5 people. Different ages, different backgrounds. But all of them had one thing in common. Harrison had taken something from them. There was Clara, a middle-aged woman who'd lost her laundromat when Harrison bought the building and jacked up the rent. Luis, a young electrician who'd been injured on one of Harrison's sites and cut loose, without compensation. Eddie and Rose, a retired couple forced from their home when Harrison declared their block condemned. Each story was another nail in Harrison's coffin. Listening to them, my anger deepened, but so did my resolve. Planting the seed. "We can't beat him in court," Clara said, her voice bitter. "The man owns half the lawyers in the city. And the cops won't touch him either," Luis added. "He donates to their unions. Keeps them on his leash." "Then maybe," I said slowly, "we don't beat him where he's strong. We hit him where he's weak."
They all looked at me.
For a second, I thought I'd gone too far, that I was just some foolish kid with a vendetta. But then Mark nodded. "The boy's right. Harrison's whole empire depends on one thing: money. We don't need to destroy him in court. We destroy him in his wallet. And in his name." That night, something shifted. We weren't just victims anymore. We were a network. The plan begins. Over the next few weeks, we met in secret, sketching out ideas. Clara knew people in the community, people who could spread stories. Luis still had contacts on construction sites, willing to slip him information. Mark had decades of insider knowledge about how Harrison's operations worked. And me? I had nothing to lose. That made me dangerous. Piece by piece, we began to see the shape of something bigger than revenge. It was a movement, a warning. One night, as I was walking home from the gym, I felt eyes on me. The streets were quiet, the shadows long. A black SUV crawled down the block, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights. It slowed as it passed me, then stopped at the corner. I froze, every instinct screaming. The window rolled down just enough for a cigarette ember to glow in the dark. A man's voice, low and steady, carried across the street. Stay out of Harrison's business. Then the SUV rolled away, its tires hissing on wet pavement. My heart slammed against my ribs. They knew. Closing reflection. That night, lying awake, the warning replayed in my head. They were watching me. They knew I wasn't just another victim. But fear didn't weaken me. It sharpened me. Because if Harrison was sending shadows to follow me, it meant one thing. He was starting to feel the heat. And that meant we were on the right track. The first coordinated strike. We decided to hit him in two places at once, his pocket and his reputation. Clara used her network to organize a protest outside City Hall. Dozens of families who'd suffered under Harrison showed up with handmade signs, chanting his name like a curse. Local news cameras arrived, capturing stories that Harrison had worked hard to bury. Meanwhile, Luis slipped me blueprints and schedules for Harrison's newest project. I spent the night creating fake safety violation reports, stamped with convincing logos. Early the next morning, those reports landed on the desks of city inspectors. By noon, the site was shut down pending investigation. 2 hits. 1 day. And just like that, the city was talking. The ripple effect. That week, newspapers ran headlines. Developer Harrison faces protests over evictions. Luxury project halted amid safety concerns. Social media lit up with photos of families holding signs that read, "Harrison stole our homes." It wasn't enough to destroy him, but it was enough to rattle him. Harrison strikes back. Of course, Harrison didn't sit still. The diner was half empty one evening when a man in a tailored suit walked in. He didn't order food.
Didn't sit down.
He just walked straight to the counter where I was pouring coffee. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said softly, slipping a business card onto the counter. The card was blank except for a phone number. "Call this, and maybe we can make your problems go away." His eyes were sharp, cold. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. I slid the card into my apron pocket and forced a smile. "Enjoy your stay." My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. If he was reaching out, it meant we were drawing blood. Doubts in the ranks. Later that night, I brought the card to the group. The reactions were mixed. "We could use this," Mark said, pacing. "String them along. Gather intel." Clara shook her head. "Or it's a trap. They'll try to buy us off, or worse." Luis looked at me. "What do you think?" I stared at the card, its numbers burning in my hand. "I think Harrison's finally nervous. And that means we're winning. But we can't slow down now. We push harder." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, one by one, they nodded. The decision was made. Escalation. We planned 3 more moves, each riskier than the last. 1. Expose the money trail. Clara had a friend in the city clerk's office who slipped us documents showing Harrison had been funneling donations to politicians through shell companies. We leaked them anonymously to a reporter hungry for a story. 2. Sabotage the image. Mark knew Harrison was planning a big gala fundraiser for one of his pet charities. Luis and I slipped in fake brochures, exposing photos of families Harrison had displaced. When guests opened them, the room buzzed with whispers. Harrison's smile froze as cameras flashed. 3. The construction hit. Late one night, we returned to another of Harrison's sites. This time, it wasn't sugar and gas tanks. It was chains and locks wrapped around equipment. Spray-painted messages covered the walls. "You can't build on broken lives." By morning, the site was a crime scene, and the photos were everywhere online. The cracks in the empire. Each move dug deeper. Harrison's investors started asking questions. Politicians who once smiled beside him on stage now kept their distance. His name, once a golden ticket, was becoming toxic. And with every victory, our group grew closer. We weren't just fighting Harrison anymore. We were fighting for each other, for all the people he thought he could bury. But victories come at a price. The price of war. One night, as I was heading home, I noticed my apartment door ajar. My chest tightened. Slowly, I pushed it open. The living room was wrecked. Drawers pulled out, furniture overturned. A single message was scrawled on the wall in black paint. Stop. My mother found me standing there, her face pale. My little sister clung to her side, eyes wide with fear. That night, I lay awake listening to every creak and whisper of the building, my fists clenched. They weren't just warning me anymore. They were threatening my family. Closing reflection. As I stared at the painted word on the wall, I knew we had crossed a line. Harrison wasn't just fighting back with lawyers and suits. He was fighting back with shadows, with fear. But fear only works if you let it in. And I had made my choice. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. The breaking point. The message on the wall haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 4 letters painted in dripping black. Stop. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a promise. And when men like Harrison made promises, they kept them. Shadows at the diner. The next few days felt heavier, like a storm pressing down on the city. At the diner, I noticed new faces, men in suits, pretending to sip coffee while their eyes scanned the room. They weren't customers. They were watchers. Every time I carried plates to a table, I felt their eyes on my back. Mark told me to keep my head down. They're trying to rattle you, he said. If you flinch, they win. But it wasn't me I was worried about. It was my family.
The blow.
It happened on a Thursday night. I came home late from a meeting with the group. As I reached the apartment, I saw flashing lights, red and blue splashing against the cracked bricks. My stomach dropped. I ran up the steps 2 at a time. The front door was wide open, splintered at the hinges. Inside, chaos. Drawers emptied. Furniture smashed. My mother sat on the couch, shaking, her arms wrapped tight around my little sister. Dad paced the room, fury etched into every line of his face. What happened? I gasped. They broke in, Dad said, his voice hoarse. Tore the place apart. He stopped, his fists trembling. I looked at Mom. Tears streaked her face as she pulled my sister closer. One of them grabbed her, she whispered. They didn't hurt her, but they wanted us to know they could. The room spun. My little sister's wide, terrified eyes burned into me. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was personal.
Cracks in the family.
That night, Dad cornered me in the kitchen, his face pale with rage. This has to stop, he hissed. I know what you've been doing. Mark told me enough. You're poking a bear that's going to tear this family apart. I met his eyes, my jaw tight. They already tore us apart, Dad. They took our home. They took everything. What do you want me to do? Just let him win. His hand slammed against the counter. I want my family safe. For the first time, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Not just fear for himself, but fear for me. The breaking point. The group met the next night at the gym, but the energy was different. Heavy. Clara was shaken. If they're going after families, we need to rethink this. We can't put kids in danger. Luis slammed his fist on the table. That's exactly what Harrison wants, to scare us back into silence. If we back down now, we've already lost. Mark looked between us, his jaw tight. He's escalating. We knew this day would come. Question is, do we push harder or pull out? All eyes landed on me. I felt the weight of it, the fear, the anger, the responsibility. My family's safety against a fight for justice. For a moment, I faltered. My mother's trembling hands flashed in my mind. My sister's tear-streaked face. But then I remembered the sound of bulldozers crushing our home. The look on Harrison's smug face. The laughter of the guards as we were thrown onto the street. My chest hardened. If we stop now, he wins. If he's coming after us this hard, it means we're close. I'm not backing down. Silence filled the room. Then Mark nodded slowly. Then we go all in. Harrison's counterattack. The next morning, Harrison's face was all over the news. Not because of us, but because he had launched a counteroffensive. His PR team painted him as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign by disgruntled former employees. He donated $500,000 to a children's hospital, shaking hands with smiling doctors for the cameras. The headlines shifted. The protests faded from the front page. And once again, Harrison looked like a savior. It was like watching him snatch victory from our hands. Desperation. That night, I walked the streets, fury burning through me. Every brick, every shadow seemed to whisper his name. We'd played clever. We'd hit his wallet. We'd hit his reputation. But Harrison still stood tall, smiling for the cameras. And now my family was paying the price. I stopped on a bridge overlooking the city, gripping the cold steel railing until my knuckles went white. For the first time, I wondered if Dad was right. Maybe I was just dragging us into deeper danger. Maybe I was in over my head. But then a thought hit me like lightning. Harrison wasn't invincible. He just looked invincible because people were afraid to fight back. And fear was a weapon I could turn against him. Closing reflection. The break-in at our apartment was Harrison's message. I own you. I can touch you anytime I want. But standing on that bridge, I made my own promise. He had brought fear to my doorstep. Now I would bring war to his. And this time, I wouldn't just chip away at his empire. I would burn it.
The trap.
The break-in had changed everything. We weren't just fighting a greedy developer anymore. We were fighting a man who would tear into families, children, anything that stood in his way. And that meant our next move had to be decisive. No more half measures. No more warnings. We had to trap him. Planning the bait. The gym smelled of sweat and dust as we circled the table, papers and laptops scattered across it like war spoils. Clara leaned forward, her eyes sharp. We can't just keep reacting. We need to make him come to us. Luis cracked his knuckles. You mean bait him? Exactly, Clara said. He thrives in the shadows, backroom deals, intimidation, silence. If we drag him into the light, he won't know how to play. Mark rubbed his chin. Problem is, he's smart. You wave bait in front of him, he'll smell the trap a mile away. I spoke up, my voice steady. Then we make the bait something he can't resist. Finding the weak spot. Harrison was a fortress, but even fortresses have cracks. Clara's friend in city records dug deeper and found one, a secret land purchase under a shell company. Harrison had bought property on the cheap, bribing inspectors to classify it as unsafe for habitation. He planned to flip it into $1 billion development. But the paperwork was messy. Too messy. If exposed, it would be his undoing. That's it, Mark said, slamming his palm on the table. We leak this in just the right way, and Harrison won't sit back. He'll come out swinging, desperate to bury it. And when he does, I added, we'll be waiting. The setup. We crafted the perfect story, a mix of truth and forgery. A report tying Harrison directly to the fraudulent purchase, complete with signatures, emails, and bank transfers. It looked real because half of it was real. Clara used her community connections to leak it to an anonymous blog notorious for exposing corruption. Within hours, the post went viral. Developer Harrison linked to fraudulent land deals. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. Harrison's lawyers scrambled to deny it. And just as we hoped, Harrison himself reacted. Not with silence, but with fury. The meeting request. 2 nights later, Mark's phone buzzed. He answered, and I could hear the voice on the other end, smooth, dangerous. This is Harrison. I know who you are. You've been making trouble. Let's talk. Mark's jaw tightened. What do you want? A meeting. Tomorrow night. The old shipyard, Pier 17. You bring your people, I'll bring mine. We'll settle this. The line went dead. The room went quiet. Clara whispered, It's a trap. Of course it is, Luis said. But it's also an opportunity. If he's coming in person, we can nail him. Catch him saying something he can't take back. Mark looked at me. This is your fight. Your call. I swallowed hard. My pulse hammered in my ears. If we went, we might not come back. But if we didn't, Harrison would keep bleeding families like mine forever. I nodded. We go. Preparing for the trap. The next 24 hours stretched like years. Luis secured hidden cameras and recorders. Clara mapped every exit from the shipyard. Mark cleaned his old revolver, though he prayed he wouldn't need it. And me? I wrote a letter to my family just in case. I tucked it into my backpack, the words heavy on the page. If I don't come back, keep fighting. Don't let him win. Pier 17. The night air at the docks was sharp, the smell of salt and rust filling my lungs. The shipyard loomed ahead, abandoned warehouses, broken cranes, shadows stretching long under the moon. We arrived first, our footsteps echoing on cracked concrete. Luis planted the cameras, his hands steady despite the sweat on his brow. Clara kept watch from a high perch, her eyes scanning for movement. Mark stood beside me, his jaw tight. No matter what happens, he said quietly, don't show him fear. Headlights cut through the dark. Black SUVs rolled in, engines rumbling. Doors opened, and men in suits spilled out, their faces expressionless, their movements precise. And then he stepped out. Harrison. Face to face. Seeing him in person was like a punch to the gut. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a shadow. He was just a man. A tall man in a perfect suit, hair slicked back, smile sharp as a blade. Well, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. The little pests come crawling out of the woodwork. I force myself to meet his gaze. You've ruined enough lives. It ends tonight. He laughed. A cold, cruel laugh. You think you can touch me? I own this city. I own the courts, the cops, the press. You're nothing but rats gnawing at the walls. His words echoed across the docks. Every second was being recorded. Mark stepped forward. Then why are you here, Harrison? If we're nothing, why waste your time? For the first time, his smile faltered. His eyes darkened. Because rats spread disease, he said softly. And I intend to exterminate you. The clash. His men moved in, fast, coordinated. Ours weren't fighters, but we were desperate. Luis swung a metal pipe, cracking it against one of their arms. Mark fired a warning shot into the air, the sound splitting the night. I lunged for Harrison, my hands grabbing his suit, dragging him close. His face twisted with rage. You'll never win, he spat. Maybe not, I hissed, shoving the recorder in his face. But you just lost. The fight exploded around us.
Shouts.
Blows. The screech of tires as one SUV peeled away. But in that chaos, I knew one thing. We had what we came for. Harrison's confession. His arrogance. His threat caught on tape. Closing reflection. We stumbled away bruised, bloodied, shaken, but alive. In my backpack, the recorder burned like a live wire. Harrison thought he could intimidate us, crush us, bury us. But tonight, he had exposed himself. And tomorrow, the world would hear it.
The fall.
The recording sat in my backpack, heavier than any weapon. Harrison's arrogance, his threat, his words. I intend to exterminate you. We had the proof. Now we needed the world to hear it. The morning after, we gathered at the gym, bruised and battered. Luis had a gash across his cheek. Mark's knuckles were raw and swollen. Clara's hair was matted with dust, but her eyes burned with fire. This is it, she said, clutching the recorder like it was sacred. The one thing he can't talk his way out of. Mark frowned. Unless he silences us first. He was right. Harrison would throw everything at us. Money, lawyers, maybe even violence. If we played it wrong, we'd vanish like all the others who had stood in his way. So we didn't go to the police. We didn't go to the courts. We went to the people. Going public. Clara's friend at the local news station owed her a favor. By noon, we were in a dim studio, the lights hot on our faces. The reporter's voice trembled as she played the recording live on air. Harrison's voice filled every living room in the city. I own this city. I intend to exterminate you. The internet lit up. Within hours, #exterminate them was trending. Activists, journalists, even politicians who had once bowed to Harrison began scrambling to distance themselves. By nightfall, protests erupted outside his headquarters. People carried signs with the names of families he had evicted, faces of children who had lost their homes. The tide was turning. Harrison strikes back. But Harrison wasn't done. The next day, smear campaigns flooded the airwaves. Fake stories about me and my family, claims of criminal records, drug use, fabricated scandals. Luis slammed his fist against the table. He's trying to flip the narrative. Clara shook her head. It's too late. The people aren't buying it anymore. Still, the pressure mounted. I couldn't walk down the street without feeling eyes on me. SUVs with tinted windows lingered at corners. My daughter clung to me at night, whispering, "Daddy, is he coming for us?" I had to lie when I told her no. The arrest. 3 days later, the dam finally broke. Federal agents swarmed Harrison's office tower, seizing boxes of documents. His shell companies, his bribes, his fraud, it was all unraveling. The news showed him being let out in handcuffs, his perfect suit rumpled, his smug grin gone. Mark watched the screen, silent for a long time. Finally, he muttered, "Never thought I'd see it." Clara exhaled, tears streaking her face. It's over. But I wasn't so sure. The last move. That night, as I drove home, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. Too close. Too fast. The SUV rammed my car once, twice, sending me skidding toward the guardrail. My heart pounded. I fought the wheel, swerving into a narrow side street. Tires screeched behind me, then faded. When I stumbled into my driveway, shaken but alive, I knew. Harrison's empire might be collapsing, but his reach wasn't gone. Even from jail, he was dangerous. The trial. Months passed. Harrison's trial was the event of the decade. Every secret deal, every rigged inspection, every ruined family, it all came spilling into the open. I sat in the courtroom, my wife's hand clenched in mine, as the prosecution played the recording again. Harrison didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, his face stone. The jury didn't take long.
Guilty.
On all counts. When the judge read his sentence, 40 years without parole, the room erupted in applause. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Aftermath. It didn't bring back our home. It didn't erase the nights of fear or the scars on my daughter's heart. But it brought justice. And that was something Harrison could never take from us. Clara went on to lead a housing rights coalition. Luis started a small construction company dedicated to rebuilding affordable homes. Mark, old, tired, but finally at peace, moved back into his father's house, saying, "Feels like I'm watching over him again." As for me, I found a new home for my family. Smaller, humbler, but filled with warmth, laughter, and safety. Sometimes, late at night, I still see Harrison's smirk in my dreams. His voice echoes, "I own this city." But he doesn't. The people do. And no matter how much money or power men like him wield, they can't crush families who refuse to bow. They can't silence voices that rise together. They can't kill hope, because hope is the one thing that survives eviction.